Hey guys, let's start with a story from key_estate_6764. AITAH for refusing to give my brother $200K from our parents' inheritance after he got scammed? Throwaway. Recently inherited $400K from our parents' estate after they passed away. There was a slight delay on my part in receiving the said amount because of some legal complications. My younger brother, 31M, received the same amount. But just months after their death, he was swindled out of nearly all his life savings by a shady investment scheme. Now he's asking me to share $200K of my inheritance with him to help him get back on his feet. He argues that our parents would have wanted us to have equal financial standing and that losing his money wasn't his fault. Yeah, right. And that he'd pay me back all later. I feel terrible for him, but I don't think it's fair to give up half of my inheritance for a mistake he made, no matter how unfortunate. I've been working hard, budgeting, and planning to use this money for my family's future. If I give him half, it puts my own financial security at risk. My wife supports my decision, but some relatives think I'm being greedy and heartless, saying family comes first. AITAH. Wow, this blew up. I didn't think I'd need online strangers to knock sense into me. Also, it's funny how quickly someone can go from calling every hour to a direct block. I called my brother and asked him what exactly happened and told him I'd only give him the money if he told me the truth, and only the truth. He told me he invested in a company called Aramco, obviously not the real one. Then he began scaling up and always got doubled, until 100K. He got back 110K, then was emboldened and invested 300K and was guaranteed 600K. And the rest is history. He made a police report, but had no evidence to share, as he withdrew in cash and dealt in cash itself, taking only token receipts which were fake. He kept the previously gotten amount in cash in his house. I only came to know how stupid someone can get. I told him his lack of basic common sense and greed does not constitute grounds for charity on my part, and told him to take better care of the remaining 100K. He cussed me out and told me I disappointed my parents. As for my relatives, I told them all in the group chat that I'd only match whatever they would pay to my brother, and even offered to double it since I was so greedy and I wanted to prove them wrong. Thanks to a legendary commenter who suggested that I love you, I was cussed out there too, lol. They're all blocked now. They told me the money got into my head. Sorry for not replying to the comments. I was really weakening in my resolve not to pay him, and you guys just snapped me back. Thank you. You all saved me. Here are some top comments on the video. The first one is from Rye_1_. If he had taken his 400K and immediately doubled it in his investment scheme, would he have given you 200K so that you would both have even financial standing like your parents would have wanted? Your parents did provide you with equal financial standards. What they apparently fell short on is in providing you with equal intellectual standing. Your brother is an idiot first for blowing 400K. And second, thinking it should be your problem. Probably also third for thinking that he's going to take the 200K and somehow be able to turn it back into 400K so he can pay you back. NTA. Magic Carpet 5846 replies to Rye_1_. Doubly funny how once the full story comes out, he only lost 250 calories if you actually offset it by the profit he made from the build-up to his big loss. From the exact amounts OP has listed, I'm sure there was more profit not accounted for in the scaling up process from 10K, 20K, 100K, 300K, yet he asks OP for 200K, which would leave OP with only 200K but the brother with at a minimum 350K. Yet he tries to claim, our parents would want us on equal grounds. Yeah, no, you're being a greedy asshole trying to scam your sibling now. The next comment is from Datra_Rose. Tell the relatives who called you greedy and heartless that you'll let your brother know that they'll be giving him money to get back on his feet. NTA. His bad decisions, his problem. Update AITAH for refusing to give my brother 200K from our parents' inheritance after he got scammed? He called again. So after blocking my brother and pesky relatives and thinking the drama was over, he found another way to get to me. He called through my wife. Turns out things are even worse than he originally told me. That 100K he had left, it's all going toward paying off loans and a car he financed, so he's basically left with nothing. He finally admitted how desperate he is, apologized for not being fully honest earlier and being a douche and cussing me out. He said he realizes he messed up big time. Greed got the better of him, and now he's asking for $50K instead of the $200K, promising to pay me back eventually. He even said he'd appreciate whatever help I could offer if I couldn't give the full amount. Yes, I asked him about the previous increments he received. Turns out he actually invested $350K. The desperation in his voice was palpable. But honestly, I'm done with him. He wasn't always this reckless or stupid. Maybe I was wrong, but the guy I'm dealing with now is a complete mess, thanks to you all who made me see that. His greed and lack of financial knowledge are his own doing, and I'm not about to bail him out. Lastly, thank you to all of you who took time to help me realize the massive blunder I was about to commit. You guys saved my finances, and quite possibly my life. I'm grateful to all of you. There are not much comments on the update right now. Give your opinion regarding whether OP is an AH or not. Let's now move to another AITAH story from ice_hope. AITAH for wanting to cut ties with my emotionally dependent suicidal friend? This all started back in 2023 when I joined a new school and ended up befriending a group of boys. I'm a girl, BTW. I became particularly close with one boy, whom I'll call Lucas. He didn't have many friends in our class, just me and another boy from our group. Things were going well at first. He was nice and supportive, and we shared a lot of common interests. Although I had other friends, my main group was with these boys. As time went on, around mid-late 2023, I started getting closer to some other girls, and we eventually formed our own group. We spent a lot of time together at school during classes and breaks, and we hung out frequently outside of school as well. Everything was fine until early 2024 when I started having trouble balancing my time between the two groups. The girls didn't mind my other group, but wanted me to spend more time with them. On the other hand, my other group, which by this point only consisted of Lucas, turned out to be very dependent on me. Lucas always wanted to be talking to me, and I often spent the entire day with him because if I spent more time with the girls, he would start crying, hitting himself, and having emotional breakdowns that would only stop once I came over and talked to him, something that he had never done until then. And after these breakdowns during classes, he started sending me messages about personal struggles he never mentioned before, which I won't disclose here, but he essentially told me how miserable his life was and how everyone had wronged or hurt him except for me, his only best friend. He also frequently expressed thoughts which made me feel incredibly guilty, and I'd often stay up late talking to him when he threatened to harm himself. Even though I'm not going into details about what he said here, he talked about it quite openly with others, as eventually when my friends reached out to him, as will be mentioned ahead, one of the first things he told them, people he had never had contact with before, was about how difficult his personal life was, with some details they didn't even know the context of. The girls started getting concerned, and once they had knowledge about his messages post-breakdowns, suspected that he was trying to manipulate me, thinking he might be lying about lots of things he told me, aka the personal struggles I won't disclose, but that he even told them in parts. At the time, they took note of some strange behaviors, like how he would walk very slowly and constantly look over his shoulder so that he would always end up near us, look at us. Regardless of how long we took to leave the classroom, we take a long time to leave, usually after everyone else has already left, and how he constantly stared at us when I was with them. They also pointed out that his breakdowns didn't seem to happen on days when I wasn't at school, and how they didn't used to happen at all before we became friends, along with the other behaviors mentioned. They started to dislike him and began questioning me about his behavior. Not wanting to expose him, I initially lied, saying that he was a diagnosed person that I just wanted to help, but they saw through it and urged me to tell the truth. Eventually, I opened up about how he frequently talked about especially when I didn't spend time with him, though I didn't disclose his personal reasons, and how I felt drained. My friends then decided to reach out to him, explaining how exhausted I felt from constantly having to comfort him, something I didn't have the courage to tell him up front, and suggesting he seek support from others instead of relying solely on me. They also tried to establish an agreement where neither group would compete for my attention, allowing me to spend time with whichever one I wanted, even if it meant spending more time with one group over the other. Lucas agreed and seemed to understand how much stress he was causing me, so he promised to stop. However, despite his promise, he didn't follow through with the agreement. Whenever I was with the girls, his other friend would come to find me, saying that Lucas was having another crisis that only seemed to stop once I was there. He also started displaying other troubling behaviors. At one point, after I blocked him, he began spamming me with messages on TikTok, the only place I forgot to block, and even got other friends to try to reach me. He went as far as writing a letter in school, which he left on his desk in plain view with a big title that read, "Farewell Letter," which caused a lot of commotion and concern in the entire class. After this incident, I resumed some contact with him, but his behavior continued to be strange. He asked me daily to sleep on calls with him, frequently apologized for everything, and said self-deprecating things. And even though he stopped talking about as often, he would still mention it briefly whenever he sensed I was pulling away. This whole situation has left me feeling drained and unsure of who to trust or what to believe. Recently, I blocked him on TikTok, where he used to message me the most, and he responded by bombarding me with texts. He asked me to unblock him, said he only wanted the best for me, blamed himself for everything that had happened, and indirectly mentioned again. He ended by saying that I would always be his best friend, no matter what. Am I the asshole in this situation? Here are two top comments on this post. The first is from Precook-89. Here are two different takes on whether the OP is the AH or not. You are absolutely NTA in this situation. It's incredibly difficult to deal with someone who is emotionally dependent and uses threats of self-harm to keep you close. You did everything you could to support Lucas, but at the end of the day, you need to prioritize your own mental health. It's not fair for him to put you in a position where you feel guilty or responsible for his actions. You tried to set boundaries and even got others involved to help him, but he continued to disregard your feelings. Cutting ties may be necessary for your well-being. The next comment is from yjoker_134, and I'll cite because Lucas is clearly struggling with deep emotional issues, and while his actions are manipulative, they seem to stem from his own pain and desperation. At the same time, you're not wrong for wanting to distance yourself from a situation that's causing you so much stress. It's important to take care of yourself, and sometimes that means making hard decisions, even if they hurt someone else. Both of you are dealing with a lot, and there are no easy answers here. The third and the last story for this video is a revenge story by the Vaneja. The landlord screwed with the wrong tenant for too long. This will be decently long as it needs some context. I'm going to throw in a lot of stuff to make it all easier to understand as well. Sure, I'll correct the grammatical errors and typos in the text. Please provide the text for me to review. Minor details might not be entirely accurate, as I've no interest in a revival of this conflict on any level. I won completely, and any resurrection can only taint the experience. We'll start off by noting that I spent about 2 decades working in security. During that time, I worked many different types of security in many different locations. The one that matters for this story was time spent in the rental housing tribunal in a major city as a kind of bailiff. For those not knowing what that is, think a courtroom in a major city anyway. In a smaller town, it'll probably be an event room in a hotel or community center, as you'd see on TV, but with less formality and an adjudicator instead of a judge. They functionally are the same thing to landlords and tenants, but they definitely aren't the same thing. This place exclusively deals with landlord and tenant disputes and is the only place to resolve landlord and tenant disputes. Note that I wasn't a bailiff and it wasn't a court, but these terms mostly accurately describe the situation and my place in it. For 2 years, I worked at the rental housing tribunal. It was early in my time in security. I was 18 to 20-ish. Being as it was a major city, the sheer number of cases I sat through was beyond my ability to count. I saw everything there was to see. No one is capable of surprising me with a story because I've seen them all. In detail, a side duty of mine was to ensure all parties had copies of all evidence being presented. I did a lot of photocopying and always read or inspected everything I copied to ensure nothing got cut off or made illegible. By the time I stopped working there, I probably knew the way everything worked well enough to be an adjudicator myself. Well, obviously not, but I'm certainly in no need of a lawyer either, should I ever have a need to go there. I also had intimate knowledge of how the system worked beyond the actual rules. Like, for example, adjudicators would always give a little leeway to anyone representing themselves over someone who had a lawyer, or how pissed off adjudicators would get when a party was speaking out of turn. Seriously, do not do that. Skip forward almost a decade. I left the city and am in a fairly large town in the same province, same tenant laws. I have a few roommates in a decently sized townhouse. We get along well, but there's a problem. Only I can write checks, and our paydays don't line up. So I'm the one who pays the rent, and I usually can't do it on the first because roommates don't usually all pay in time. We advise the landlord we might be a day or two late, but we'll always have it by the third at the latest. They have no problem with it at all. I spoke to them myself. For about a year, this works fine. No complaints from landlord because even if we're often a day or two late, we always pay. We're also fairly quiet and don't damage the property. Nearly model tenants. I do not actually have any idea why, but one day this changed. I suspect a different person in the company started overseeing the region. One day, suddenly we got a summons to the Rental Housing Tribunal, hereafter to be referred to as RHT, on the 2nd of the month for failure to pay rent. This doesn't actually lead to a case because we paid on the same day. But now we have to pay the application fee the landlord paid in order to serve the summons. I to the neighbor who was also the superintendent and eventually heard back that their contact at the company was now demanding the 1st of the month, no exceptions. Well, that really didn't work for us, so we probably had to pay that fee 15 to 20 times over the next 2 years. I could have gone to tribunal over it, but we were technically without a leg to stand on, and I knew it. Maybe if I went enough times, I could ding them for harassment. But I don't have time for that, and my roommates don't care. After being split between us all, the fee wasn't enough deterrent to change our behavior, so we accepted it. If this were the only issue, there wouldn't be much story, though. At around the same time, the rental leeway vanished, so did mandatory maintenance. I'm not going to list everything that went wrong and wasn't fixed. You'll get a decent idea at the end. We suffered through it. We were all working too many hours at pay to be able to actually do anything about it. We adapted, but after about 2 years, it broke. Everyone but me up and moved out for various reasons within a 4-month period. I'm not going into any details on my roommates at all because things kind of exploded for a couple different reasons outside of this. No reason to dig any of that up. I had been saving up for a while and was able to quit my job without having to immediately get another, so I suddenly had a lot of time. I didn't want to stay and pay the rent by myself or have to find new roommates I could live with. And with my experience in the RHT, I knew I had the landlord by the balls. So I went for them. I stopped paying rent. Annoyingly, I didn't get a summons the first month, but I did the second. So I went. With a meticulously documented plethora of evidence of failure to maintain the property and entering the property without formal notice. I had a copy for the landlord and a copy for the adjudicator. I know from experience that technically you're supposed to give the other party the evidence before the tribunal, but I also knew about that leeway an adjudicator gives to those who represent themselves. So I didn't give the landlord the evidence until our case came up, 100% total ambush. They argued they were ambushed, but the adjudicator just dismissed the case, dressed me down a little, and told me to file my own summons, as I should have done. This was the petty revenge. The landlord and lawyer drove 3 hours to get there for nothing, worse than nothing. I filed my own summons and the big day shows up. It's been about 4 months of me not paying rent at this point. I'm prepared to if I lose, but I don't think I'm going to lose. The whole thing could not have gone better. I had 20 to 30 pages of evidence and 20-odd photographs. They had nothing. They had no actual defense for our water heater being out for 6 months or us not having a fridge for a year, just to mention 2 severe issues. Their entire defense rested on us being late for rent, which actually worked against them once that led to the adjudicator learning how many times we'd paid the application fee, and lies that had no evidence to support them. They even talked over me a few times, and I saw in his eyes the one time I opened my mouth to protest during their turn to speak, but forced myself to shut up with every gram of willpower I had. so only a squeak came out and the adjudicator respected me. He had no respect for the landlord. I had won on every possible front. The only question was how much. It was more than I'd ever seen. I got 9 months of free rent, and the landlord was ordered to have everything fixed before the next month was over, or I'd get more. I gave notice I was leaving at the end of the 8th month and left at the end of the 9th. Because the landlord had never renewed the lease, I didn't have to give him the 3-month notice the lease specified. If you want a figure to put to it, I basically got a $13,000 judgment in my favor, adjusted for inflation and rounded. I also made the landlord and lawyer drive 3 hours, twice, only to lose. The landlord's face was so red at the end I thought he'd have a heart attack. He didn't, though. Bye, Mark. Edit to clarify a few things based on questions. I also want to add for those good landlords out there, I do feel you. My time in the RHT was eye-opening. For every bad landlord, there are 10 bad tenants easily. There's a massive debate of debates to have over the whole thing. I'll only say that I do sympathize with the good landlords out there. I'm not trying to paint all landlords as terrible. This is the only landlord I've ever had that was so useless. Edit. I've revised my estimate of the ratio based on a little research and some comments from 30 tenants per landlord to 10. I'm probably still wrong, but the sheer number disparity between landlords and tenants effectively requires there be more bad tenants than bad landlords, simply because there are so many more tenants than landlords. I'm going to leave it at that and just beg you not to rip me apart from either side. I'm intimately aware of the problems both good landlords and good tenants face, and my sympathy goes out to both sides. Here are some top comments on the post. The first is from future_direction 5174. I believe this story because I also worked with a court system and learned how to navigate it. In my case, it was a lands tribunal, and the other side was not represented. He had appealed a decision made by my colleague. I disagreed with my colleague's decision as she had a grudge against him. He appealed, and I informed my boss that his appeal was valid. I was instructed to handle the hearing. I insisted that either my boss or my colleague should handle it, but my boss refused and required me to attend. During the hearing, he presented his case first, and I simply stated, "The facts are as stated. I have no further argument," and sat back down. Upon returning to the office, I informed my boss that we lost and returned the papers. I never received any feedback. We had to pay his court fee, which was only $20 or something insignificant. I was not willing to fight a frivolous case just because my colleague didn't like him. Here is another comment. It is from Sandy Peterson. Thank you for weighing in on the side of the landlord. I was a landlord myself for many years, and we tried to bend over backwards to work with people. Most were great. Some were one step above scam artists. OP replies to Sandy Peterson. No problem, I wish I had thought to do it faster. There are a lot of scam artists trying to take advantage of each other and everyone else in the industry. But the RHT is set up to favor the tenants because they are more vulnerable and have no power. In theory, that works perfectly, but in practice, it means you have so many tenants who can be considered professional system manipulators that drag on the landlords like a giant black hole. There are landlords like that too, of course, and they each have an outside impact versus tenants. The system is flawed for either side. But a truly expert tenant can manipulate the system forever and repeatedly without any real cost. There were cases I saw on my first day in the RHT that I also saw on my last day in the RHT. A landlord will usually face some cost sooner or later, often a significant one. The landlord will usually beat the tenant, but won't usually actually get anything out of doing so. Even if eviction is secured, they then have to write off the lost rent as well as find a new tenant and hope they're better than the last, and have to do repairs and cleanups to make the space habitable. It's not a business I've had any interest in since my time at the RHT,